George Etherege's play The Man of Mode, or Sir Fopling Flutter, 1676, epitomizes the comedic spirit of the Restoration era, focusing on Dorimant, a libertine attempting to court the wealthy Harriet while disentangling himself from his previous entanglement with Mrs. Loviot. Etherege established himself as a playwright renowned for portraying the frivolous lives entangled in flirtation and romance, earning him a place among the Big Five of Restoration comedy. The Man of Mode, his final play, appears to lampoon many of the social figures prevalent in Restoration London. At the outset of the play, Dorimant, a notorious womanizer, laments to his friend Medley about his waning interest in Mrs. Loviot, his current paramour. Their conversation is interrupted by an orange woman who informs Dorimant of a beautiful young woman who has been speaking of him. Medley discerns that she refers to Harriet, an heiress. Intrigued by her described charms, Dorimant seeks more information about her. Despite facing initial disapproval from Harriet's mother, Lady Woodville, due to his tarnished reputation, Dorimant expresses his boredom with his current romantic affairs, desiring to end his liaison with Mrs. Loviot, especially since he has set his sights on her younger friend, Belinda. Together, Dorimant and Medley devise a plan to provoke Mrs. Loviot's jealousy, hoping she will terminate the relationship herself. Their scheme is further complicated by the arrival of young Belair, who shares his infatuation with Amelia, a companion to Lady Townley, his aunt. As the plot unfolds in Act 2, Lady Townley and Amelia engage in gossip while old Belair declares his affection for Amelia, unaware of his son's feelings for her. Meanwhile, the eccentric Sir Fopling Flutter, newly arrived in London, garners attention for his excessive preoccupation with fashion and appearance, embodying the archetype of a foppish gentleman. Etherege's play skillfully weaves together the romantic entanglements and social satire characteristic of Restoration comedy, offering a window into the extravagant and libertine culture of the era. He has arranged his son's engagement to Harriet instead. Subsequently, Mrs. Loviot confides in her waiting woman, Pert, expressing her dissatisfaction with Dorimant's apparent neglect. Belinda enters and exacerbates Mrs. Loviot's jealousy by informing her that Dorimant has been seen in the company of a masked woman around town. When Dorimant arrives, he accuses the women of spying on him and insinuates that Mrs. Loviot herself has been showing interest in Sir Fopling. Pretending jealousy, Dorimant storms off. Act 3 commences with Busy, Harriet's waiting woman, teasing Harriet about her feelings for Dorimant. Young Belair enters, and they both realize their lack of affection for each other. Nevertheless, they feign affection in front of old Belair and Lady Woodville. Dorimant enlists Belinda's help to orchestrate a scene at the mall, where Mrs. Loviot will appear to flirt with Fopling. Meanwhile, Dorimant informs Fopling of Mrs. Loviot's supposed feelings for him. That evening, the key players gather at the mall. Dorimant encounters young Belair and Harriet strolling together. Despite Harriet's flirtations, she denies any romantic attachment to Dorimant. Lady Woodville, unfamiliar with Dorimant, arrives and insists that Harriet leave. Dorimant privately admits to Medley his infatuation with Harriet. Mrs. Loviot and Belinda arrive, accompanied by Fopling. Dorimant watches, hoping for entertainment, but Mrs. Loviot pretends genuine affection for Fopling, aware of Dorimant's gaze. Despite claiming to be tired of Mrs. Loviot, Dorimant is furious. Act 4 sees Dorimant disguised as Mr. Courtage to attend a dance at Lady Townley's and converse with Harriet without her mother's knowledge. Though he gains Lady Woodville's approval while disguised, he must endure her vocal disdain for Dorimant in his presence. Fopling nearly exposes Dorimant's disguise, prompting Dorimant to depart to meet with Belinda. She implores him to end his association with Mrs. Loviot. Dorimant dismisses her concerns and sends her away in his carriage, sparking fears that Mrs. Loviot may suspect their relationship. Young Belair learns of his father's affection for Amelia and resolves to definitively break off his engagement and marry Amelia clandestinely. In Act V, Mrs. Loviot indeed becomes suspicious of Belinda's arrival in Dorimant's carriage. However, the coachman lies to alleviate her doubts. Dorimant and Mrs. Loviot argue over his accusation of her flirtation with Fopling. Amelia and young Belair's marriage takes place, much to old Belair's chagrin, though he eventually accepts his son's unexpected union. Dorimant announces his readiness for marriage, prompting Mrs. Loviot and Belinda to reveal his true identity to Lady Woodville, initially provoking her ire until Harriet professes her love for Dorimant, leading to Lady Woodville's softened stance. Other characters express their support for Dorimant, while Fopling, confused by Mrs. Loviot's sudden disinterest, arrives. Harriet playfully warns Mrs. Loviot and Belinda to steer clear of Dorimant for their own well-being. Mrs. Loviot storms off in frustration, and the remaining characters prepare for a celebratory feast before Dorimant, Harriet, and Lady Woodville depart for the countryside. Critic Brian Gibbons lauds The Man of Mode as the epitome of comedy of manners, a genre revolving around societal norms and affectations. Etherege's work not only achieved immediate acclaim but also laid the groundwork for future playwrights like Congreve and Sheridan, who further developed this comedic style. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.